Welcome to the Motogp Xtra podcast.
So after a year away, the Motogp circus returned to the Aragon circuit this weekend for the 12th round of the 2024 Motogp season. I'm Rhys. Joining me as always to discuss the events of the weekend is my co-host Dill. So, Dill, it was pretty interesting this weekend, almost a bit more like a Mandalika style weekend as we've come to see over the last few years, because the circuit had been resurfaced not too long before they got there. I think it was finished in about June time. So that meant Friday morning they're on the track, there's not been much running at all, the surface is not laid in, and they were miles off, and that was just the start of the weekend because there was so much rain as well, like overnight, keep washing all the rubber away, so grip was at a premium. What did you make of that? Because I know you're going to have some pretty strong opinions off the track surface this weekend.
It wasn't my favourite weekend of the year, to be honest. It was probably one of my least favourites. I didn't really enjoy the race weekend. Funnily enough, right, I watched GP to see them at the top of their game, doing things that other people can't. When, like, as soon as they run off the racing line and like they're nearly falling off, it looks quite out. It wasn't a good weekend for GP in my eyes. I might be in the minority with this because I think a lot of people watch it just for excitement, and it was exciting in ways when as soon as someone went for an overtake, they went off track. But perfect example is Aaron Canet went slightly off the race line and basically high-sided because it was so dirty. Now I know the weather is something that they can't control, but I always wondered throughout the weekend, one, why was it resurfaced? For me, it was a perfectly fine racetrack. Again, maybe we haven't been there, so maybe it has decayed in the years we haven't been there, but I don't really think so. And two, why was it done so close to the race weekend? It's kind of well known that a resurfaced track needs about, at minimum, 6 months of kind of settle time before any racing. And straight away, we saw when we got there that there was patches kind of relayed where cars had kind of taken chunks out of the track. So immediately that was a red flag for me. A lot of the corners where you're on full lean, there's just a big patch as if you'd see on your normal road where they fit in a pothole, and there's a big dark patch. So a couple of times in all classes I saw people commit to a corner and they just kind of tense up and sit the bike up because they're going across this kind of different tarmac, and changing tarmac on a race bike is quite difficult for consistency. So it was just a horrible weekend for me in terms of track surface, and yeah, it was, as we'll get to the GP race, which just seemed worse. It wasn't great.
Yeah, it seemed like GP was amplified, especially on the starts with the amount of torque. But also, I don't know where you live, but they never fill the potholes in where I live.
Yeah,
It's
true.
Absolutely terrible. But yeah, track conditions were dodgy, and like you said, of course, there were lots of areas where you could see those patches. Like, let's put it into perspective. It was something that even my mum asked me in the middle of the race. Like, if this has just been resurfaced, why is there like areas like even even my mum was noticing it? So that tells you how much of an issue it was this weekend. So Moto3 then initially looked like we were going to see almost a Jorge Martin Moto3 Aragon style of race, as David Alonso just was so fast all weekend, hit the front immediately, and had like almost 2 seconds at the end of the first lap. Looked like he was going to absolutely check out initially, but didn't quite play out like that in the end. But did you have that same thought, Dylan, initially when the race started, that just looked like it was absolutely Alonso's to lose? Because we've just seen him win basically everywhere all season. He's got 2 seconds in the first couple of laps, because we know Alonso is Alonso's biggest worst enemy. We had similar sort of conditions at Jerez, where it had rained the night before, so there were wet patches and stuff, because the Moto3, obviously first race of the day, meaning there was still a fair bit of water on the circuit, although it was, of course, a dry race. Once he made it through the first couple of laps, do you think that perhaps it was David Alonso's to lose?
It for up until about half race distance, I thought he was doing well. And as they started to catch him, straight away then I was like, right, his tyre is on the second half, we'll say. It's on its last legs. And I think we had maybe 6-7 laps to go when the group of four caught him, and it cut to a shot after him coming out of Marcus corner, and there was some heavy banding, and it just looked like that tyre was well used. And you kind of think, right, maybe his tyre is just kind of that's just the base everyone's at that moment. But it did look then straight away that a couple of times into the reverse corkscrew kind of thing at the middle of the track, where he just literally kind of looked like he didn't want to tip in. You could just see, you can see a lot from away a rider's body language on top of the bike where they just don't seem to turn in, and you're like, oh, he's just gone wide, but it's just, they can kind of feel the lack of entry grip, so they're just kind of, they add a bit of understeering themselves because they just don't commit fully to the corner and they run it in at a bit of a weird angle, and a few times he did that. But in fairness to him, he does kind of have a couple of laps where he looks a bit sketchy, but then he seems to recover the grip, so unless he got a bit heavy graining phase. But I did think after the first few laps it was his to lose, but he is also probably not the greatest on the tyres. He seems to have so much out of the tyre that he doesn't always have the tyre come the end of the race. But he still had a very good weekend for his championship because he still pulls up points over everyone he kind of needs to. So yeah, I don't think he'll worry too much, but it still just shows he has a few things to learn yet in these kind of longer, more tactical races.
Yeah, we saw a similar thing at Portimao, didn't we, when he kind of overused his tyre. A little bit of a different situation there because it was obviously battling in the pack, but perhaps maybe he pulled the pin a little bit too early, whereas the first guy to catch him was obviously Colin Veyer, who didn't qualify too well. His strategy in qualifying didn't seem to work out. He tried to stay out on the extra tyre. He just tried to stay out on one tyre, basically, which generally Moto3 isn't a bad thing to do, and it works for most of the time because you don't get people getting in your way or trying to tow you or anything like that. But it did seem like here, because the abrasion was so high, you needed... Well, it wore a tyre out over the course of qualifying session, so you needed that new tyre, that fresh rubber. So he started, I think it was 11th place on the grid, and so as he sat there for a while, he was around about that position, but I just then noticed all of a sudden he was up to like second. I didn't even see him like ghost his way through. I don't know if you caught him. I was like, oh, Colin Veyer's second or something, because I think it was Foressato before that was chasing after Alonso. I think Foressato ended up going a bit backwards, but Colin Veyer really managed the race quite well. Unfortunate, obviously, not to come out with the win, but once again, we've been really impressed by Colin a lot this year, and again, it's another different way he sort of played his race. We've seen him start near the front and manage to stay there. We've seen him sit in the pack, like sort of sitting there and just saving his tyres. We've even seen him now, though, not qualify too well, not panic, just kind of slowly wait for the race to come to him, actually find his way through and then catch up to the runaway leader. And obviously, unfortunately, it didn't quite work out for him because of Rueda obviously came through to win in the end. But given the tyres that Colin actually had underneath him being the same as pretty much everybody else, I think he did a really, really good job this race. And I'm actually still quite surprised that he's not second in the championship, because obviously saw Tola, but Colin just seemed to be there literally like every single weekend this year. He really has been good, and I am really looking forward to actually seeing him on that IO Moto2 bike next year.
Yeah, he did quite a good job again today, and I think that's literally everything we say each week. He's done quite a good job. Each week he puts a kind of 8 out of 10. There's no weekends where he's missing. Even on his off weekends, it might be a 5th, and that's exactly what you need in a long season like we're having. So in fairness to him, he's very level-headed. We've kind of said throughout the year there's only been a couple of mistakes, and consistently he has speed. He usually is good over one lap as well, and does qualify towards usually the front 2 rows, which is, in suppose in Moto3 it's not the be all and end all being slightly further back, but it was just again coming through the pack in one of those races where you would have probably said before the race, for him to get up the grid, he's probably going to use more tyre, than he'll get to the likes of Alonso and Rueda and probably not have the tyre to battle with them. But it turned out not to be. He was able to manage his tyre, and he does seem to have pretty good racecraft. I don't think outright over one lap he's the quickest. I find a lot of times in the races he seems to find an extra gear in terms of speed in the battle when he needs it. But I think he's a very tidy rider, and I'm also looking forward to seeing him on a bigger bike, because he is slightly too big for the Moto3 bikes, I believe. So he's another one when he gets onto the bigger bikes that I'd be looking forward to seeing how he can kind of manhandle one of the 765 Triumphs. And again, I think he'll be a future rider. And I don't know if he can maybe get it to GP, because I think maybe he'll have a bit of the advantage with the passport, because I think it would be great for him to get a Dutch rider in there with the Dutch TT. But it's a long way to go yet, but it's good to see that we have a couple coming through, and they're looking quite strong, and he is one of the best riders in the grid at the moment in Moto3. And it's a shame really he's moving up, because maybe next year you could argue he could go again for the title and he could have a better chance with him another season under his belt. But it's probably for his career that's best he moves up to Moto2 faster than rather than waiting.
Yeah, I think it's tough for the riders that are like him, obviously quite heavy, quite tall. You can stick in Moto3 and maybe you could win the championship, but you maybe just get beaten by somebody again, and you kind of get lost. Whereas perhaps going up to Moto2, you can go up with obviously a good team, maybe really take a good crack at it. And like you say, there is a path to GP there, because obviously he's in that KTM sort of peer mobility group well, I suppose even in the Intact GP team, he's already in that, but he's really in that sort of program by being in the IO team. And if you're looking at who is on the KTM next year, MotoGP, obviously Acosta, they're not going to get rid of him anytime soon. Binder, to be fair, has really picked up his form the last few rounds, so again, can't see him getting rid of him. But you've got Vinales and Bastianini. Vinales probably isn't that far off, maybe throwing in the towel, retiring a few years' time potentially, or, you never know what could happen. So there could be a spot open up in a few years' time for him to go to MotoGP. So there is a potential step there, and I think you're right. They would love to see a Dutch rider in the top class. I mean, I can't even think of.
He's also kind of following a same path as Raul Fernandez, where he was slightly too big for Moto 3. He could be quite good in Moto 2 and then get a seat in GP because of it. Because that's I was just thinking there we were talking. He kind of has done the same thing as Raul Fernandez, where he looked good in Moto 3, but you also felt he maybe had a disadvantage and then got into Moto 2 and was very quick straight away. So I'd be interested to see can he kind of follow the same path as Fernandez, because you see now Fernandez on the Aprilia is turning into a pretty decent top 10 rider on his day. So it'll be interesting. Can he kind of follow suit and maybe come through with the KTM group, same as Fernandez did?
Hopefully his time in GP with KTM's a bit better than Fernandez, because that was a rough period. But enough about kind of predicting Colin Vieira's whole career. Maybe that's a podcast for its own, trying to predict the where the different Moto3 riders are going to end up in 5 years' time or whatever. But we may as well talk about the actual race winner then today, Jose Antonio Rueda. And honestly, if you told me that he'd won a race previously, I'd have fully believed that, because I kind of assumed he had, but he hadn't actually won one. He's not won one for a really long time either, like midway through his rookies and his junior GP campaigns, which he was the first guy to win, was it both in the same year, a stat which I think we've attributed to the wrong rider several times previously on the podcast, but there you go. I'm pretty sure, David Alonso's done that, but it is Rueda that was the first guy to do that one. And there was more to his race than perhaps it looked, because he was on a different tyre, so they brought sort of a safety tyre, they kind of called it, for this weekend, because they weren't sure of how the surface were going to be. Pirelli, this is the tyre supplier for Moto3 and Moto2. I think they must have brought sort of similar safety tyres, similar compound, I guess, for both of them. And there was only two riders that went with it, Rueda and obviously Piqueras as well. But Piqueras, unfortunately, his race ended really early in the gravel, despite looking quite promising. But Rueda was the only sort of front-running rider that still had it on. I think there might have been a couple of riders further back actually that had it as well. But he came through at the end, kind of showed he was like a second a lap quicker than even Via, who was catching up Alonso by a few tenths of a lap as well. He just rolled to the back of them, passed them like they were standing still. He had the little moment at turn 12, he almost crashed there, got a bobble on the brakes, ran wide, then touched a wet patch and lost the rear, so that could have been race over for him, but he managed to bring it on home and he finally gets his first Grand Prix win. I mean, like I said, I assumed he'd won one previously because he's kind of one of those riders that's there or thereabouts, although I think it's maybe safe to say he's not quite lived up to his hype so far. I mean, he was a rookie last year, wasn't he? He had some good rides there, but he, like at the start of the season, like Portimao, I think he was quite good, but then not really a lot else. And then this season, he started off quite well. Did he get taken out in the first round as well, I think, out of a podium position? And then he's kind of in there or thereabouts. He had the appendicitis, so he missed a round or two off the back of that, and it's just not quite all but together for him. And the races haven't quite come together for him either, but finally to come through and win one in this fashion, in a tricky race, and obviously managing it well. Maybe not so much of a scrapper potentially, because that's how a lot of these Moto3 races play out, and this one was a bit different, so maybe that's why Jose's finally come through. But either way, obviously winning in the IO team, it's always a good way to go, and hopefully he can sort of kick on from here, because we've heard so much about his potential, and like I said, so far he's maybe not quite lived up to that.
Yeah, I kind of, thinking back of his junior career and before he got into Moto3, he's not one of those riders that won 10 of 18 races a season. He might have only won 2, but he'd been second, third, fourth, second, third, kind of always there and just putting in savage performances each week, putting kind of 16 to 20 points into the championship each week. And I think he's probably done something similar in Moto3, except just caliber rider slightly higher. So instead of each week finishing second or third, it might be he's getting a top 6 each week, banging it out each week. And I think, again, he's had a couple of injury kind of problems so far, and it just hasn't maybe gone as smoothly as it could have done. But I think now he's got as all riders will say, the first win is the monkey off the back. So I think this will be a great kicking on point for him. He's one of those kind of, I suppose, Aldeguer, Costa kind of next level coming through, that he's getting into Moto3, and we already know about this kid, so that kind of says a lot when they kind of get into, when you're hearing about people that even are not on the world stage yet, there's always a big hype. So I think as well, sometimes it can be a little bit tough when a young rider comes through and there's already People saying, oh, he's going to kind of follow in the steps of what Acosta's done, win titles and move straight up the GP at such a young age, and then be a front runner then immediately. So it can take riders sometimes a bit more time than others. Not everyone is the Acosta where nothing seems to phase him and get on. He sometimes needs to learn. And again, we always say as well with the rookies and we'll say the junior GP, they don't always go to all the same tracks, so there is a bit of learning with some tracks. So the first year or so at the world level is always such a big learning curve. But he was brilliant today. He was smart to use the extra hard, I always call it the bowling ball tire, because usually it's a very good wear characteristics but doesn't give the performance. But he used it to great effect today, and again taking his first victory. And again, kind of like you, I would kind of imagined already that he's probably sneaked the win here or there somewhere else, but probably just shows how Alonso's won so many races this year that even riders that you kind of imagine has kind of picked one up haven't had a look in really. But I think for the rest of the year now, if he can kind of continue these podium style races where he can be there and he can probably pick one up again, because I think there'll come a point where Alonso would probably start to maybe not take his foot off the gas, but he'll make sure each week he's just getting a bank of points to get his title over the line. I don't think he'll be taking too much risk for wins when they won't be needed. So I think another couple of races could be on the cards for him, and I think he'll be another guy that will be somehow trying to cram into GP in 4 or 5 years time. So again, he just needs to continue the way and going. He did a brilliant race today, and I'm happy for him because he was pretty chuffed afterwards as well.
I guess you could say he got a strike on the bowling ball tire, maybe.
Exactly, yeah.
But yeah, it's I think you make a good point now with Alonso. Actually, kind of segues into our next point quite well, that he might be taking his foot off the gas a little bit with the lead he's got now. It's like could allow riders like Rhys I to maybe pick up the odd victory. And like you say, Alonso has won so many races this season. It is really difficult for anybody else to pick up a win. I mean, what's he won, like 7 out of like 12 or something like that? So it's like half. I think there was like a stat where if he won today, it'd be like the first rider to win 8 out of the first 12 since Rossi did it in like the 125 class. So yeah,
not bad company.
That's pretty crazy. So obviously in the lightweight class, I mean, of course, so like that's obviously Marquez has done it previously in the GP class and stuff like that. But in terms of the lightweight, first time since Rossi when it was still 125. So yeah, good company, like you said. And I think we do know that David Alonso is probably going to go on to some really special things. But I think it is looking like at this point, I think we kind of already knew this, but it looks like the championship's pretty much sealed. Is the lead like 80 points now, something like that? It's crazy. Like it's. Because I think it's extended it even today. I mean, 4th place is still a good result, don't get me wrong. But that's almost like a disappointing result for him because how good his season's been. So, yeah, he beat Ortola. Obviously, he did lose some points to Via, but that was about it. Rueda's kind of quite far out of it. Luca Lunetta, actually, probably worth giving him a shout out. Really good ride from him. He's had a couple of flashes of talent this year. I'd be really interested to see how maybe he got on a KTM, to be honest, because obviously the Honda we know isn't quite up there, but he was definitely the only Honda anywhere near the front, and he has had some solid performances in some of the races, so it's good to see him ghost his way through, well, not ghost his way through necessarily, but kind of just be there and sit there and didn't do anything too silly either, which we've seen rookies do before, so thought I'd give him a little bit of a shout out. But yeah, it looks like Alonso absolutely got this in the bag now. Doesn't look like Holgado can lay a glove on him, because again, he beat Holgado today, he beat Ortola today. Okay, he lost to Via, but Via's not even the closest championship rival, so he's extended his lead. And would you say he's probably going to wrap it up in one of the first flyaway rounds? Well, I suppose now there's a lot of flyaways. Before you could kind of do that because there would only be about 4 races after. But maybe just before we come. Well, it's going to be before we come back from the flyaways because it'd be Valencia, wouldn't it? So yeah, maybe we'll talk about Chang Sepang sometime somewhere like that. Maybe where he could wrap up the championship.
At the moment, Vire's second and he's 76 points. So he pulled away on everyone because he beat Ortola. He lost points to Vire, but Vire was third, so he's jumped up into second, but he still extended the gap.
The gap is bigger, yeah. So it's
exactly, even though the person has changed. So it's one of those where kind of little mind can look a bit. The statement could look wrong, even though it is true. But it's 76 points, so that's 3 race wins. We've 8 left, so he'd need to get it up to about 125 to win it in the flyaway. So he'd need some serious points. Realistically, he'd probably win it, like you said, kind of with about 4 races. So he'll probably get it to the 100 mark, I'd imagine, and that'll be enough to kind of do it. So he'll do it with kind of 3, 4, 5 races ago, which is pretty crazy considering we went down to penultimate race last year. I know it's still kind of tinkered on with everything that happened last year, but it went down to the last rounds of the championship. But
there's like 5 points in it at the end, so that's how close it
exactly was. Yeah, so really close, whereas there's no fear that by the time we get to Valencia there would not be 5 points in it between first and second. But today again, we kind of already touched, he had a good start, got out front, showed speed, but again just shows that as much as he's very, very talented, he just takes a small bit out of the tyre too much for him at the moment. That's something I think he's going to have to learn with Moto 3, and eventually when he gets on a Moto 2 bike as well, it's something he's going to have to kind of figure out. So I think for the moment he just needs slightly better race management. Now I say slightly, I'm trying to nitpick at a guy who's kind of walked the championship so far. Each week we kind of talk about how brilliant he's been. I'm trying to just find the little things where he's not doing particularly well. Again, for me, he pushed slightly too early, too soon today, but at the same time, in a race like this where the track conditions aren't perfect, like even when I was watching, it was kind of like, Jesus, a lot of wet patches here. Like, it wouldn't take much for someone to go down and have a little moment. We saw, obviously, with about 3 laps to go when he ran wide, just touched one. It still shows like that, even at that late into the race, it was still a major problem if they went offline. And he controlled a lot of the race today, but just couldn't kind of finish it out with a good result. But doesn't really need to be winning races at this point. He just needs to be top 5, putting in points and finishing. If he can keep finishing in the top 4 positions, he's going to win it around probably Chang, like you said. So again, he's been pretty faultless this year. He's made the odd mistake, but again, he's only been in the class a couple of years, so you can't really fault him too much. And again, I'm trying to nitpick at things he can improve in, but he's been really standout performance, and he's probably been better than Acosta was in his Moto 3 championship year. Really, he's been more dominant anyway.
Acosta kind of choked, didn't he, towards the end? Really.
Yeah, he started to misfire at the second half of the season, and kind of Foggia came back into it, and Darren Binder put praise to that in Portimao. But it was it just looks like Alonso's kind of kept the foot on. He's been relentless and kicked on, and even when he doesn't maybe look the quickest, he still squeezes a very good result out, and I think that it will stand to him. And I think, again, like we've kind of said 100 times over in this podcast, the championship is his. It's just a matter of where and when he gets his hands on it, and yeah, he's a very, very exciting prospect for the future years.
So Moto2 then, coming into this weekend, the 2 empty helmets boys, the 1-2 in the championship, neither of them really coming into the weekend in the best way at all. Obviously, Iagora missing the last race after crashing in a free practice session and breaking his hand. He was back, but of course he was injured. And then it was Sergio Garcia who has managed to dislocate his shoulder or hurt his shoulder outside of a race meeting. So we don't know exactly what he's done. It sounds like it is literally just an accident at home rather than like a training injury or anything like that. I think it was described as a domestic incident. So I think perhaps he's fallen down the stairs or something at home or whatever, or slipped in the shower or something. You don't know what could be, but he's coming to the weekend with an injured shoulder. We'll start off with him. Obviously wasn't looking good initially anyway. In practice was struggling so much. Then in qualifying has a crash and smashes the other shoulder, so going to be sore on that side as well. Qualifies 27th on the grid, picks up a long lap penalty in the first 5 or 6 laps, and then ends up pulling into the pits. It was a disastrous weekend for Garcia. I mean, last weekend wasn't great for him, but I did stick up for him and say overall it was decent till he got the long lap. But this one, obviously coming in injured, tricky conditions, easy to crash and pick up more of an injury, which he potentially has done in the qualifying. So in the race, he could very well have done that, and especially in the pack with the other riders, probably the right decision for him to retire in the end, being that far off. But it's really, his championship's kind of starting to unravel. The team were also saying that's to do with missing out on the Pramac Yamaha seat. Not sure exactly how much that is. Maybe that explains the absence of performance in Austria a little bit, but this time I think seems like the injury, but really not the weekend that Garcia needed or wanted. Fortunately, I guess Algora didn't have him the best weekend either, but yeah, Garcia, maybe this championship lead starting to unravel a little bit for him.
It's just slowly getting out of his hands. It just seems like it's just starting to slip, and he's kind of, the more he tries, the worse it gets from at the moment. Obviously, we know very little about what happened outside of the race weekend with the injury, but we knew he came into the weekend with a shoulder injury, and it would obviously be definitely a hindrance throughout the race weekend. And then he had it's one of those horrible kind of off-throttle high sides. Again, I put it down to kind of track conditions. Maybe he's a touch deep. I've seen a lot of it on boards where you see it, so it's hard to see his position on track, but regardless if it was a rider error or whatever it was, it's still not great away. And then you finish qualifying, and then your next time you're back on track is your sighting lap to go to the grid for the race. So again, more reasons why I think we need to have a look at the schedule for Moto 2 and Moto 3 to get a 10-minute warm-up in just in the morning, just to get a couple of laps and just to take that small bit of anxiety out of your head before you go to the grid. Whether, how was my shoulder after the crash? Can I ride? Can I do a couple of laps? Am I in too much pain? Do I need to adjust something on the bike to make me more comfortable. You shouldn't have to do that on the way to the grid. It just leaves too much up to chance then.
They
So
could easily do it as well. I mean, they actually added a 5 minute like practice start session today for MotoGP. Like that's half of one of their warm up sessions, so they could easily add 20 minutes somewhere for a Moto3 and a Moto2 warm up. It is crazy, isn't it?
yeah, it just like it shows when they need to, they can change, but it still kind of perplexes me that we don't. When it's such morning warm up is one of the most important sessions of the whole weekend. I'll stand by that statement. It's just, if you've had a mechanical Saturday, if you had a big crash, if you have had some weird issue on Saturday, or if you're having a tough Friday, Saturday, you want to try something that you've worked with over the team. It's very hard to put faith into a setup, or if you've had issues throughout the weekend, into your race on Sunday. I think 10 minutes on a Sunday morning, it's not too much to ask for, and I think more bike action on track. I think from a fan's perspective as well, it's more bikes on track for me. If you're like, I know a lot of people who go and say sit on the grassy banks and stuff like that, they're getting in nice and early, so they're going to be there for all of it. So you're still going to have people there, and I know they want to get in the parade and kind of go down the Formula One line of being
Yeah, I
very
want to see
much
the GP
rider.
riders on a truck. I don't want to see the Moto3 guys.
Exactly.
Yeah, like
MotoGP riders on a truck on their phones talking to each other and doing these interviews where they're like just rolling around in the back of a Mercedes, like. But it's I think a lot of the GP can sometimes get his head turned by what F1 do and try to copy it, even though it's not always great. Like, even when the F1 thing go around, like, they're all just talking to each other and kind of waving. Like, I don't think it's like, personally, I'd rather see another. I go to watch the bike racing. I don't want to go there to like see a load of riders be paraded around in a trailer. Like, it's kind of not really. Like, if you're going to do something where riders and fans direct, do what World Superbikes do, where they have the little kind of paddock meeting and everyone can get together, they get signatures, pictures. That's a much better thing, and that's kind of mandatory from Dorna for Superbikes, so it's much better. You get close up, you can talk to the riders and stuff. That's much better in terms of access. Seeing them kind of in the middle of the track, 50, 60 meters away as they roll by is kind of not really for me. I'd say the riders would probably prefer as well the close up with the fans and stuff. But again, it just gives a few minutes extra around the weekend where we could tidy up and get these warm ups. But to kind of go back to Garcia, I feel bad for now because, one, he probably never admires getting that Pramac seat. He was put in as one of the names because he is the probably informed season rider this year. He's Spanish, he's young, and probably will he get a seat in GP at some point? Maybe. You could probably get one of the lesser teams, maybe. I'm not too sure. I kind of, him in Canada, I suppose, I can put into a group where you just think, where are they going to go? Who's going to take a punt on him? I'm not too sure. But I suppose if he continues this form, if he wins a title next year, he's going to get some offers from somewhere. Maybe in 18 months, 2 years, he could end up back in Pramagama if that team still works out to be kind of bringing through young riders in time. But for the moment, his retirement during the race, he got a long lap for track limits. He was one of the only people all weekend I saw get any warnings for track limits. So it was just, it showed if he was getting track limits when no one else was, he probably didn't have the strength to control the bike, and the bike was probably moving around. He's probably gone off track. He qualified 25th place, and it was one of those weekends to forget. And you kind of hope at this point you had 3 or 4 weeks off where he could go away, do a bit of physio and kind of have a bit of rehab and kind of come back, clear the heads. Right, we have a run in this championship. We need to bounce back now and have a good run up against Iagora and the likes. But he's going to Mazzano now, and it's going to be 2 Mazzanos, and it's kind of happening at the wrong time for him. His dip in form and the injury and stuff. So yeah, even though Iagor is injured, I still fancy Iagor to come back because he had in my eyes a stunning race today with the return of his race pace again. Not having a great weekend, but the race pace was there. I took a big swing in points back off of Garcia, and it's just a shame for Garcia because it couldn't be long now before maybe we're talking about a new championship leader, and he then has to go on the attack, and that's where mistakes can happen when we go to these flyaway races where you have to risk, and we all know what can happen in these kind of Asian countries when the humidity's so high. We get weather, we get a bit of everything. It's not what place I'd want to go trying to attack a championship. I'd much rather go trying to defend and just maintain. And I think Garcia is going to probably struggle. Hopefully the injury isn't as bad and he can kind of be back to somewhat race fitness for Mazzano 1.
yeah, hopefully we'll be able to bounce back with the injury. And obviously you mentioned Igora there. I actually agree. He had a really good race in my opinion because he was obviously injured himself. Again, fresh injury. So 7 days ago he did it, or I guess 8 days ago now, because I think he did it on the Saturday, didn't he? So it was such a easy little thing to do. I mean, that's changed his championship completely because he was probably also favourite to win last weekend, but he comes here. He struggled a little bit all weekend. He actually didn't do too bad in practice in the end because he got directly through to. Did he get directly through to Q2? But he got through to Q2 in some manner anyway. Whether it was directly, I think he may have actually had to go through Q1, so I could have been wrong with that. But either way, he got through to Q2 in the end. So that's a big thing to do. Obviously, it's so difficult to pass in Moto 2 anyway. Obviously, like we were saying with the track conditions, again, it was so difficult to pass offline. It was very, to bring up the comparison again, much like Mandalika when you go there, or remember Indianapolis back in the day was always a little bit like that as well. It was difficult to pass off the racing line just because the track just doesn't have that much running. I suppose here it was a bit different because it was new surface and it was dusty and stuff from all the sand coming on because it was in the middle of the desert and obviously the rain washing any rubber away. So there were different reasons, but same result at the end of the day. So he did quite well to do that, and yeah, he just did as he always does. He goes his way through. His start wasn't amazing, but he was just outside the points on the opening few laps. But he just slowly picked off one rider at a time, and he caught up to this little group. I think he had like Vietti in it after Vietti had been punted off by Joe Roberts, which I'd still love to see another shot of that actually, because obviously he got a penalty for it, Joe Roberts. We saw the onboard of Vietti, and yeah, it did look like Roberts was definitely at fault there. To be fair, it looked like he came to shot and hit him, but would have been good to see it from a different angle to see exactly what happened, because you just see it get clouted. So it'd be good to see if there was actually a reason for it, or if he did just get his braking wrong, as obviously Vietti sort of tried to go around the outside of him. But yeah, Agora just slowly goes his way through. Then with Roberts himself crashing, a couple other riders faltering. Moreira, who was looking really good going into the race, ended up going backwards. And where did Agora finish in the end? Like 8th or something like that? Pretty decent considering where he started and the injury that he's carrying. So actually, shout out to Agora, because it's better than the race. He started on pole. He started on pole in Silverstone, ended up finishing like 14th. So yeah, it was not maybe as many points as he would like to have gained on Garcia, but he certainly limited the damage. And as we'll probably talk about in a little bit, not many of the other championship rivals picked up points either. So yeah, actually, Igora definitely had a good weekend.
Yeah, it's what would be known as a champion's ride, coming back from injury, not having really shown anything all weekend. I think he was fortunate to be in Q2. And yeah, he looked early in the race to be struggling. I was thinking, yeah, he probably just doesn't have the race fitness. I was like, he's at one point, I think Garcia was 23rd and Igor was 18th. I was like, it's kind of a null. They both score no points. Nobody loses, nobody gains. But all of a sudden, we had a couple of crashes in front, and then before long, Igor was kind of 15th, 16th. You're thinking, oh, maybe there's going to be 1 or 2 point swing in this. It'll be good for Igor to kind of take the edge off and just get a couple of backs and kind of get him started going forward. But then we see this kind of long lap pop up for Garcia, and think, well, there's no point in him even continuing. And in the end, he didn't. He pulled in because I'd say he was in a lot of pain. And I think when you're that far off the speed and you're at the back of the grid, you've already had a long lap penalty. Kind of one of those things you're thinking probably best he just maybe takes the rest of the weekend off, try to recover and try to get back for Mazzano in the best health possible. But Igor then just started chipping away, and then before long you're thinking he's nearly half the championship lead from 20 down to 10, and it ended up being 8 point swing, and that's huge because we don't know how bad injury for Garcia is, and we know that on our Sunday Igor is the man to beat, and he's so difficult to beat. But he did a perfect job. He kind of got fortunate, I suppose, with the Joe Roberts instant pushing Vietti wide. That gave him a lot of speed, and then Joe Roberts crashing on the lap was another position. So he did gain a couple of kind of maybe half-handed positions, but on a day like today, it's exactly what you need. And again, he made one mistake really all year, crashing in Austria, and to miss that race was really unfortunate. So that was incredibly bad luck for Igor. So it was kind of nice to see him maybe gain a few positions that he probably wouldn't have gotten in the normal kind of plan of the race. But he did exactly what he needed to do. He took points off his teammates. He beat Joe Roberts, obviously, and for me, Aldeguer was beaten as well. So that was the perfect Sunday, really. I don't think you could have asked for much more from a slightly injured Igora. Kind of hoping again now for him that the week now we have between now and Mazzano 1, he can maybe just get slightly closer to full race fitness, and then we can see what he can do for the running, because he's in a very good position now with his form and his riding, because I think he's probably the form rider of the year overall. I think Dixon could be argument close second, but I think in terms of just the position in the championship for Igora, I think in his race management, that'll just give him slight edge going into these final few European rounds, and then the dreaded flyaways for some.
Yeah, hopefully Agora will be able to continue. I mean, a week is another week to recover, isn't it, really? So
Yeah.
he should hopefully be... this should be the worst it gets, really, and if that's still in 8th place, then that's pretty good, because I think you get 8 points for 8th. I think it's quite handy
Yeah,
how that
yeah.
works out, so that's always quite... That's an easy one to remember, because some of the points are really easy. It's like, you remember like the top 5, then you kind of lose your way, you're like, oh, 8th of it, 8 points for 8th, so... Really, that's like a first to third gap almost. That's the way I look at it sometimes. It's like you could win a race and still gain less points on someone than that. I mean, I know obviously in theory it's the other people that matter as well, because obviously if you gain 25, you gain 25. But you could win a race with Garcia second, and that's less of a gap than what he's gained today. So yeah, it's a really important amount of points, and yeah, not insignificant. So it was definitely a good ride from Iagora. And as you were mentioning, throughout that we had Joe Roberts going down, Aldeguer going down. No one seems to want to win this championship because, for whatever reason, they just do the silliest things. I saw with Aldeguer, obviously he's been struggling since the summer break. I think his best result since then has been 12th, which is not good at all. As he won at Saxon Ring, basically ended the first half of the season in the best way possible. He was kind of not too many points behind. He was a decent bit behind, but it's kind of like, well, if he keeps up this form, he could chip away. And if we had a race like this and he'd actually won it or something, then you'd be saying, oh, he's kind of back in it. But he's continued to sort of throw things away. 12th place at Silverstone, I believe. I think, what was he, like 20th last week? Absolutely nowhere. It's like no points at all. And then no points again this week. Back on form, seemingly. Back towards the pace. Pulled some really good passes early on, actually, at the inside, I think, of... Arbolino was one of the riders, I think. Can't remember who the other... Was it Onchu the other one, or Moreira? He did into 4 and 5. He basically passed 1 through the first one and 1 through the second. It was a good little move, but he was looking a little bit desperate in his, kind of obviously knows he needs to get some more points back, and then don't really know what he was trying to do to Dennis Onchu. Onchu had to sort of just shut the throttle slightly because there was something in front of him, which obviously gave Aldeguer a run, but wasn't really far enough alongside, sent it anyway, realised he was going to hit Dennis, rammed on the rear brake seemingly, the rear comes round, pings him off, so then pushes Dennis a little bit wide as well, and again, that is another 0 points for Aldeguer, and I think at this point, really, it's got to be championship over for him, because he's not really got the momentum going for him. We thought going into this weekend it would be good because, he's got that Grassini ride confirmed now. I mean, I know the whole Ducati thing's been confirmed for a long time, but now he knows what team he's going to, what side the garage he's going to, all this stuff. Just those extra little bits. I mean, we don't know what's going on behind the scenes. Maybe there was talks of not bothering in the end because his performance hasn't been too good, or maybe just even in his head he's thinking there's a chance of that. You don't know. So you'd think the stars aligned for him, but again, it throws it away. Joe Roberts, another rider who really had an opportunity to gain here because he's obviously the closest to those 2 MT helmets riders. So really, if those guys are out, he's got the opportunity to pick up the pieces, and was running decently, 5th place. Then gets a long lap penalty for having a contact with Vietti that I mentioned earlier. Again, haven't really seen that from any other angle other than the Vietti on board, but certainly from that does look like Joe Roberts did just basically career into the side of him, push him out of the way. So yeah, you can't really argue that's unfair from that angle. Rejoins just behind his teammate, battles with his teammate a little bit. Then we see in the little onboard camera on the sort of the bottom left on the standings, he high sides out of turn 12 on the last lap. Don't know if there was contact or anything like that. I don't think so. I think he just tried to pass his teammate, then he got the switch back and he tried to pick up the power and he just pinged himself off. So no points for Roberts. So, and obviously with the 2 MT helmets, guys, literally the highest championship contender that scored any decent points was Alonso Lopez. Really, nobody seems to want to win this championship because, I mean, Alonso Lopez has had some stinking races this season as well.
For me, I was watching the race when it was earlier in the race where Fermin Aldeguer was in P4, I think, at the time. Iragor was out of points, Garcia was out of points. I was thinking, this is exactly what he needs. He's going to get if he could... I wasn't, from the interview before the race from Dixon, I wasn't too sure if Dixon felt he could win. He just seemed Dixon always seems to, regardless of how he feels, kind of put in a very confident interview. He just seemed to kind of doubt himself before the race. So I was just thinking, maybe he doesn't feel like he has it. So I was thinking if Aldeguer could win this, put 25 points on the board and no response from the other 2, that's a huge jump. That's exactly what we say in most weeks in the podcast. If you get to a weekend where he can get a 25 versus 0 for the other 2, that would be perfect. And I was thinking, this could be, we've kind of built up maybe that he can somehow get himself back into the title hunt. if things go his way and he gets a bit of luck. And today I felt personally that maybe this could be the change if Iogora isn't at the races for the next few rounds and Aldeguer can put savage points in. You could just think, oh, maybe then going into flyaways, and we know he ends the season particularly well usually. So I was kind of building this whole kind of narrative in my head, and he then went and crashed. So all that went out the window. But it was like, it was just a weird one, because it was one of those where I feel at the moment, the perfect analogy is just he's making all the wrong decisions. He's trying too hard, and in the split decisions you can go left or right, and he'll always pick the wrong one at the moment. It's one of those things that happens in sport, happens in every sport, where you're at the top of your game at something, you just have a bit of a dip, and then you keep making the wrong decisions, and then you start to double bluff yourself. You start to overthink it, and you start to, instead of going off instinct, you think twice about it. And that could have been exactly what happened today, because you see Anchu does get a bit of a moment, has to kind of check up, and then Aldeguer is a third of the way alongside him, and then just tries to go for it when it's just like, he's probably in his head there trying to make a real aggressive, sharp, kind of forward, positive move.
Wrong guy to do that to.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing, even if he manages somehow to punt Anchu wide, you know for a fact, into the second part of the bus stop, that KTM badged Calix is literally going to be sliding up the inside of Aldeguer.
Riding that bike like in a
yeah, exactly, yeah. So like it's one of those ones where I just feel at the moment every decision he makes is somehow the wrong one, and it just keeps backfiring. I completely agree now. I can't argue any point that he'll come back, because this is on breaks in Saxon. Really, he's showed that he keeps making these mistakes and keeps picking A when it should be B and B when it should be A and all this kind of thing. So at the moment, I just feel sorry for him. I'm kind of happy he's got the deal done now, and we've known for a while, but it's announced, it's public, it's all kind of said and done, and he kind of can focus on this year. But I think he just needs to. I think I've said it multiple times in this podcast. He just needs to kind of finish off the season as best he can and just reset. I think this year now is it's done for him, really. I think after all the promise that he could have had of winning the title this year and going up as a champion with Ducati, then it just hasn't really worked out that way, and it's unfortunate for him.
Yeah, I suppose he's tested out his new leathers. I guess that's the only positive he can take from this weekend. The new Dainese that he's now using for the remainder of the season. So then, Jake Dixon, our race winner. If I say the words Sam Lowe's 2020, do I get agreement on that one? Because that's certainly the vibes I'm getting from his season at the moment.
I can see it, but I disagree. I think I
just mean it more from a fact that pressure is off him and he starts performing right in races.
Yeah, I agree in that sense, but I don't agree how it's going to end. In terms of, I don't think that we'll get the last 2 or 3 rounds, or last 2 rounds, we'll say, and it's Dixon's title to throw away. I think it's still a very outside chance that Dixon can win this one. TNT are doing this whole song and dance that it's his championship now, when it's not. He's 43 points if my maths are correct off, and
I think that's what they said. Yeah, which is a lot less than it was previously, but.
Yeah, exactly. And I suppose if Garcia keeps having issues, and if there's another mistake from Agora or weather or something, he's good in all conditions. He can qualify. There's no reason why he can't. But I just think it's a bit too much still for me personally. I think Dixon is probably the form rider at the moment right now in the class, taking Agora out with the injury. But I don't personally think he'll win it. I think he'll be top 3 at the end of the year. I think his season will end up being his best one yet in the class, and I think he'll build it next year going to Mark VDS. I think he'll go in probably as the favourite, hands down favourite for me, I think. I'm trying to think who I put against him, really. You think Kant staying put, Alonso Lopez. There's other riders who are probably as fast as him, but he's more complete than pretty much everyone in the class at the moment for me. So I think if he can maybe go on a good run and finish off a real close battle. We've seen before how people have a good run in and then they make a step the next year and it didn't go closer again, and he'll definitely have a chance next year. But I think as much as probably for the Brits they're hoping that he can kind of go on that run and maybe get across the line with the title, I think next year is really his big hope for the title if he's going to win one in Moto2.
Yeah, I think it's very unlikely ultimately that he can fight for this. I mean, 43 points, it is more of a possibility. Like, I'm not going to completely outright dismiss it now because it's not I mean, I don't know what the championship's looking like now, but is he ahead of Aldeguer now? I'd imagine he probably is. Which
I will get it up
is,
now.
because if he's not, then we kind of have to say the same thing, I guess, because he's that far behind. But considering the form he's been on, it has been really good. I mean, like you say, other than Agora, probably is the form rider this year. Ever since basically Catalonia, he's been probably the best rider, I would say, on the grid in terms of just consistency and performances. He really did do a good ride today as well, to be fair. I'm not just saying it for the sake of bigging him up. I think he really did do. In fact, the 2 races won this year, he actually did a really good job at them, but they were slightly different because this time he wanted to lead, whereas obviously in Silverstone he sat behind Canet for the whole race. This time he got past a couple of laps by Arbolino. Arbolino was in front for a couple of laps, but he got back ahead of him, and then he just dropped him at the end. So yeah, it was a really, really good rider. I think he is within a shout of maybe a top 3. I think that would be quite good for him because he just missed out on that to Aldeguer last year. So it's kind of would be a little bit ironic if he comes back and sort of steals it away from. Well, I suppose Aldeguer's not in the top 3, but if he steals it away from somebody else right at the end, like Aldeguer did to him in the last season, I think that would be quite good because his end of the season was quite poor. Obviously, he got to kind of India and a few other things going on. So yeah, I think if he keeps up this performance, it really could be a good end to the season for Dixon. But yeah, I definitely agree. I don't think the championship is really on. It's mathematically possible, and it's not completely ridiculous to say now, whereas it probably would have been a few rounds ago. And he clearly still believes that he can give it a go. But 43 points, that's a lot, and it's not just 43 points to Garcia either. It's probably a good 35 to Iagora, probably still at 20 odd, maybe even less than that to Alonso Lopez as well. So you kind of need all 3 of those riders to have at least a weekend where they don't finish. Well, I suppose 20 points you could gain by just finishing ahead of the guy, but those are the other points I think you do still require the other guys to have some more shockers.
He's 5th in the championship at the moment, so he has a lot of riders ahead. So he's only 3 behind Roberts, and I think Roberts, ever since the Aprilia
snub, 3 behind Roberts. I actually didn't realise he was that close. Huh.
Yeah.
So he could easily become top Calyx rider then, I guess, which is...
Oh yeah, I'd say that's unquestionable really, because the closest other Calyx is Vietti, and he is...
Any other season, that's world champion.
Yeah, literally. He has 20 points to Alonso Lopez, and I think I'm actually, or to be honest with you, for the moment I've slated Alonso Lopez on this podcast. In fact, he's that close in the championship. Or sorry, my math is incorrect. He's 11 points, to Roberts, and then he is 14 to Alonso Lopez. So he still has a bit of a jump to get in the top 3, but I still think
14 points you can take.
Yeah, that could be a weekend's work when it comes to them, because I think Roberts really, it could kind of see, I don't know if people saw him in the gravel. Today, he had a mistake today and he went ballistic in the gravel. I think just the emotions are kind of getting too much now for Roberts. I think he's just it's all boiled over the fact he didn't get the Aprilia seat. Because I think again he'll have to go again next year, and then you start to think, oh, they're on contracts there. Then you have another couple of crop of young Moto 3 riders coming through who might get the nod over him. So I think Joe Roberts is kind of after hitting a bit of maybe a mental wall. I think he hasn't performed great ever since it looked like that the Aprilia seat wasn't going his way, and I think it's just taken the edge off his season. So I think he might end up being 5th or 6th in the world. Alonso Lopez, like I said, he's had such a kind of what I would class as mediocre season, but I suppose he's finished races or hasn't, and he has won races, so you have to kind of give him that. And again, he's 3rd in the world, and then Iagora and Garcia. So we're set for a very good running, I must say, because I think GP is 2 men, Moto 3 is 1 man, and then we have about 4 or 5, you could argue, in a good chance in Moto 2. So yeah, I could see Dixon still doing it. I just think that Igor, I know he's made one mistake all year and it cost him big, but he doesn't make mistakes. I think going to the flyaways, I think they're where Igor should have a bit of an advantage over, just with the conditions and stuff. That's where he would have kind of done his very early racing in them conditions, so I think he'll have a bit of an advantage. So it'll be interesting to see what Jake can do, because I do remember, was it last year he was really strong in Mandalika, or the year before he crashed out in the early laps, but he was on pole, race winning pace. So we can't really discount Dixon, because I think again the Brits riding a lot in the rain, they probably don't get the humid conditions, but yeah, he definitely has a chance. But I think 3rd in the world, maybe 2nd, depending on how bad Garcia is running. If he really doesn't kind of get his head back in the games quickly.
I think third is a good realistic target for him. Actually, in fairness, I think that's
100%.
where he should adjust his focus. And if you just keep doing that and taking it race by race, the points may come. But I think third is 14 points. That's pretty realistic. I think. I mean, Lopez has been pretty good actually. To be fair, this year. I actually didn't realise he had such a decent season. Like, I remember him crashing out the lead at Portimao, but then I kind of I've seen him drop back with tyres a lot, but he has been scoring points even when he's been doing that. So I suppose, to be fair to Lopez, I mean, another one that's probably a bit disappointed that he maybe didn't get the Pramac Yamaha seat. But yeah, it's, I think at the moment that team's going for more experienced riders. So maybe some of these other guys can try and get that in a year or two's time. I know there's stuff with the Mastercamp team potentially going on that might become Pramacs. They might hire some riders there that keep them there for a year or two and then move them up. I don't really know, but you do make a good point with Joe Roberts, just to go back to that obviously he's missed out on the MotoGP chance, and you got to think for him, even like the American team, he probably thought he was in with a good shout at that, and they didn't want him. It's not like the other teams have come knocking, so will they come knocking next year? It is one of those things, isn't it? Like, they've kind of shown that they don't want him, so yeah, it must be a bit of a heartbreaking situation for Joe. And yeah, another mistake. Like you say, he looked just destroyed in the gravel. He was having a bit of a tantrum in the gravel, wasn't he? Really, it was probably because his last lap he's high-sided off battling with his teammate, which is a bit strange. I don't really know why. Not that team order is really a thing, but why fight your teammate for like fifth when he's fighting for the championship? Surely just like let him have it. I don't really know. Especially when you see him come out along that penalty. I did think that when he then passed him in the next corner, I thought, well, probably could have just sat him behind him. Probably would have been I'm sure the team would have quite liked you to do that. So yeah, but it's an individual sport to a certain extent, I guess. Still, so yeah, fair play to Ramirez for going for the positions. So then, the MotoGP class, and we may as well talk about, I suppose, the biggest thing that happened this weekend. Well, maybe I think it's the biggest thing. I guess the other thing is probably second. The old Marc Marquez has returned, is what I've got written in the notes, but of course it was very much a perfect storm. Marc Marquez finally returning to the top step of the podium. Absolutely dominated the weekend, didn't he? From FP1 all the way till the last lap of the race. Only session he didn't top was warm-up, which he went and did one installation lap of and came back in. So every session he actually actively competed in, he was the fastest rider. It was the kind of weekend I expected to see at all of the Marquez special circuits this season that we so far haven't. I didn't expect to necessarily see this at every track, of course, but the ones where he's typically had the pretty big advantage, I kind of expected the sort of the dominance. Maybe not this much of a gap because obviously the conditions have played quite a bit into that as well, but kind of expected him to sort of dominate some of these weekends, do clean sweeps a bit more. But it's kind of the completion, not the completion, I guess, but kind of nice for the story that he's come back from all the injury and adversity to come back and win. And it's a shame that the race the way he did it was a little bit more boring. It would have been nice to see him scrapping with Bagnaia or Martin like we saw obviously at Jerez. The really good battle between Bagnaia and Marquez. It'd been good to see another one of those and seeing if the old bike could come out on top or whatever. But yeah, I mean, there's not much to say about Marquez. Absolutely faultless this weekend. I think the one mistake I saw him make was he ran wide at turn 12 on the first lap of the sprint. But that was literally about it. He basically made the grid look like amateurs this weekend, which we've seen him do in the past against, maybe it's fair to say, slightly weaker field, with Dovizioso being like the nearest competitor and they're not maybe getting the best out of the Ducati. I mean, I know there were still some fantastic riders on the grid, like Rossi and Lorenzo at the time, but they were definitely on their ways out, and Quartararo was still just finding his feet, and Vinales was arguing with Yamaha all the time. So maybe some of these weekends we've seen this in the past, maybe it wasn't quite as strong of a field, but we've got Bagnaia, a rider that's now equal to Kevin Schwantz in the win record. Martin, who we know is someone that's definitely got the potential to be a world champion, and is on course to do so this year at the moment at least. So I think it was just a flawless weekend for Marquez, and I think it's good for the championship to see him back on top, I think.
Yeah, there'll be a lot of happy fans out there that he's after getting the sprint win off his back, and obviously 3 years since his last race win. I think perfect conditions. You could not have wrote a better script for Marquez to get a race win. sketchy kind of low grip conditions. We obviously, like, we went back to last weekend where the tires they brought give less grip in Austria, and it was more in the rider's hands, and he was quicker there. It shows that when it comes down to more rider ability and less aero package, right out the package, and ECU kind of overall electronic package, he still comes to the front, as does Pedro Acosta, funnily enough, and the likes of Binder and stuff. So it shows probably the biggest issue at the moment with GP is that it's very much like F1. You need to have the right tools, or you can't really do the job that you're physically and your talent deserves. So Fabio Quartararo, another perfect example that he should be up there.
Bless him, wasn't he, in the sprint on the straight?
Yeah, in this
out the corner and just saying disappear.
It was he was doing. I think there probably will be a segment in a moment where we'll squeeze in his sprint alone deserves his own little mention. But it was just the perfect conditions for Mark. Low grip, bit of rain, dusty, one line. He's ultra kind of consistent, and he's very precise in his movements. It's a left-handed track, so it was just literally, you cannot write a better race weekend for Mark, as having the factory Ducatis look like they were struggling, Martin crashing qualifying. There's nothing that could have went any better for Mark, as it just was all on a platter for him, and I feel like he's had bad luck all year, so it's finally time that he's kind of gotten all that luck kind of back in one race weekend. He gets the pole, gets the fastest laps in sprint and main race, and gets the 2 wins, and he gets the 68th overall Grand Prix win, so he's doing pretty well for himself. And again, it was good to see him back to front. Again, overall, I didn't really enjoy the weekend that much. I would have liked it if he was closer. It was good to see him win, but he was in his league. He was so far.
We didn't see a lot of him, did we?
Exactly. Like it's a bit like Top Rack at the moment, where like you kind of cut him every 4 or 5, 10 minutes or whatever, and he's like, oh yeah, he's still somewhere in the next sector and doing something. But yeah, it was, again, I'm sure there's a lot of people out there really happy to see him back in the front winning races again. I think, to be honest, I don't see him winning again unless we get another weekend where Mandalika style kind of track conditions, or the wet really is where
fortunately we're going to Mandalika then.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
I think we might get Mandalika conditions at Mandalika, to be fair.
It would be pretty funny if we didn't really.
Yeah. So, the track conditions has really improved.
Yeah, exactly. They've sent a load of 18-year-olds out in scooter for the week before and got mad grip. But again, it just shows currently the bikes have too much air. They're too out of the rider's hands. This isn't the mid 2000s where the rider made the difference, and the top riders, even if they didn't have the best package, could win. I think we saw if we had more old school bikes this year, I think Marcus is still up there towards the front, winning a lot more races. But I saw it's probably very good for him that deep down he knows now that he probably always knows, because I don't think he's ever a rider that's been lacking in confidence, but it's probably good to back it up that he knows that when it's in his hands, he can still do it. And he's probably deep down as well, he's pretty happy that Pecco's absolutely nowhere, because I think Pecco's kind of made Mark look a bit average in some races this year with the gap. But I think a lot of people are like, oh, it's the bike, and we'll never have a perfect answer of how good the 23 and 24 bikes, what the gap is. So it's yeah. But again, I just want to point out as well, the 23 bikes look pretty good this weekend, because it looked like with the lack of grip for everyone, it brought Digia, who was injured, a bit more front forward, and as well, look, Bezecchi had a good race as well. So I think overall it shows when there's a lack of grip and the rear tyre doesn't have amazing grip, the GP23 is a lot closer in everyone's hands. Obviously Mark made a huge difference this weekend as well to win, but it just shows that the newer tyre that they brought this year has hampered the 23 a lot more. So we've probably missed out on a lot of what Bezecchi could do this year, as well as a lot of Mark's performances are probably gone unnoticed because of the difference in equipment.
Yeah, I think you make a good point with that. The 23s as a whole looked better, because Alex Marquez as well. He was running really well in both races, actually. So, yeah, I mean, I know, again, that's probably another special track for him. He's also always gone pretty well at Aragon over the years, but even still, I think you're correct with saying that the grip definitely made the difference, which I think is something we are going to talk about in a little bit on the points. But yeah, I think that definitely helped the GP23s, but I still can't believe that he was on pole by 8/10 as well. That's absolutely ridiculous, because that's just a massive margin these days. But yeah, I don't think we'll see. Well, I don't think we'll see another weekend like that. We could at one of the flyaways, in fairness, but I think he could pick up another win in that. And I think they have made a step, because I think he was happier at Austria, like you said as well. So he might be a little bit more closer from now on. But yeah, I don't think it's something to expect every weekend. It definitely was condition and track dependent. And probably somebody else you can say the same for is Pedro Acosta. This weekend they've reverted back to, I think, the bike that they're using like Jerez time, where, again, he was fighting for the podium still back then. I think maybe he kind of reached the limit of the bike a little bit, got a bit frustrated that he couldn't keep up with those GP24s and even the GP23 of Marquez in a lot of races, and even Digi Antonio, so even the GP23s in some of the races. And he started to make more mistakes and crashed a little bit more. But, I mean, the Austria weekend was terrible for Pedro Acosta. It was absolutely horrendous weekend. But this weekend, right from the outset, really, he looked good. Didn't get through his Q2 directly, which was a bit of a surprise. But I think he said he made a mistake on his actual push time attack lap, so that's probably why. He got through, though, anyway, in the actual Q1 session. So it doesn't matter how you get to Q2, you get there. And from there, put it on the front row. Sprint race, the front three just absolutely pulled away from everybody else. And so I think that was helped a little bit by the start from Pecco, and then obviously him struggling and kind of holding a lot of the other pack up, I think. I think that kind of obviously did help with that gap, but he got away in that race. And then in the main race, he actually got away better because he got away second. Then he got passed and he got a bit flustered. He went offline a few times, got passed by a couple of the riders, but then obviously they slowly disappeared. The riders that were in front of him, put him back up onto the podium. And yeah, I think it kind of shows that clearly he gets on better with this Jerez package. I think, yeah, it was a combination of the fact that they're probably bolting too many new bits on the bike, which KTM have done how many times? Like every single season. They just put like a million parts, and then the riders get confused. And I think generally the grip helps them too, because that's where they lose out to the Ducati out the corner of the grip. So when there's no grip, they're better, because Binder was also up there. Kind of those two were really showing how much better they are than Miller and Fernandez this weekend, to be fair as well. Because to be fair, a lot of those seasons, if you look at the standings, if you look at the points as well, Acosta and Binder are very close together on track a lot of the time. So they're both pretty much getting the maximum out of that bike that you can, which is good to see. But yeah, it's good to see Acosta back on form, because he's definitely struggled. People kind of starting to say, oh, maybe we judged him a bit too early, perhaps maybe he's not as good as it looks, maybe it's a bit of a fluky start. But I think the development direction's not really worked on the KTM. The GP24s have got on song and they're pulling away a bit more. You got people like Marquez getting more dialed in with the GP23, so he's a bit more competitive than them on a weekly basis. So I think overall, it's almost like the satellite conundrum that you get a lot of the time, where you start off well and drop back, except obviously just on a different bike that hasn't developed as well. Gone back to some older settings, got to maybe a track that suits him a little bit better, well, track surface at least anyway, and he's back on form and beating the factory boys once again. So yeah, really good weekend from Pedro. Probably the only mistakes he made were in the middle of the race when he got a bit flustered, but doesn't matter, because all the time he lost there was all the positions he lost there, they kind of gave themselves back. So it was a podium for him.
Yeah, I think again, riders, when the grip kind of go away, the top riders always seem to come to the front. I kind of always remember Stoner on a kind of very low grip track was always very good. Just the way he could control the slide and control the front and rear sliding was always something he was so good at. And I think Pedro is in the same situation as when there's very little grip. The way, like we've seen obviously recently, how he trains is he's always out of control and sideways and drifting it around and kind of pushing the front on his knee and stuff like that. So I think I kind of go back to the point I made a while ago about the fact we haven't seen Marcus probably challenging for wins lately when the bikes are that much closer, and the overall aero and everything just putting too much pressure on the kind of bike side of it more than leaving it in the rider's hands. I think Pedro's kind of fallen kind of short again a couple of times this year by just not having the equipment. And I think we've seen him at the start of the year be very strong, but I think this GP24s have made that step. And I think again the KTMs might have just got a bit flustered as the years gone on and have tried things to make instead of finishing maybe fifth every week, they've tried to change things and end up going slightly slower. And I think going back to what they have now is probably the right way to do it. But I must say it was really, really interesting to see him back at the front, because he is I suppose unquestionably the biggest talent coming through. And there was at one point where he was behind Marquez at the start of the race, and it was just nice to see kind of Mark kind of getting back to his form and Pedro back to his form as well, and they were kind of just within a couple of seconds. It was just a nice race for Pedro again, I think, coming back, and just shows that even though he's learning, just give him the right conditions, he can be quick. I just think it takes it out of the bike's hand and more into the riders, and that's, I think, probably the only benefit of this weekend of the poor conditions was that we saw some of the top riders come back to being top riders and showing kind of the level of field they have there. Because again, we've mentioned Fabio looks slightly better at a track he hates. He absolutely despises Aragon. Pedro back towards where he should be at, and Mark doing what Mark does.
Yeah, I mean, like we've alluded to a lot of times, we'll talk about now, the grip seemed to be much of a leveler. More so maybe in the sprint than the main race. I think when the main race still shakes out, it kind of still allows the better bikes are just better still. They're gonna eke that advantage over, and they're gonna probably look after the tyres better and things like that. But overall in the sprint, definitely was more levelled. It's not a surprise. You get to a circuit where the grip is kind of low. The top riders come to the top, like you said, Marquez winning the race. Obviously, Acosta up there. I mean, Martin's up there every weekend, so it's not really a surprise. But again, perhaps maybe showing himself to be better than people have rated him previously, because people perhaps think that it's just the Ducati that's doing it. But he was definitely the quickest GP24 by a decent way this weekend. Like, I mean, I think he would have definitely been second on the grid if he hadn't crashed in qualifying, and he was the only guy that really could run with Marquez for a few laps, because there were parts in the main race where he did gain briefly, but Marquez did respond. So he was like the only guy that really could get anywhere near him all weekend. So it was a good weekend for Martin. But obviously, like you say, Fabio Quartararo, we'll talk about his sprint now, because we've alluded to it a lot of times. Obviously, Bagnaia was struggling in the sprint. It looked like he had some issue, which I guess we'll probably come on to later when we talk about his miserable weekend really as a whole. But that allowed Quartararo to actually be on the back of Bagnaia for the first time in probably about 2 years, and he was certainly sending it a little bit, wasn't he? He was pretty ambitious. He was sending up the inside to turn 12, which we still haven't seen, but they were miles off the track when it cut to them, so clearly didn't quite go to plan. He stuck it the inside to 5, he stuck it the inside into the little chicane. We saw him doing it on Ralph Fernandez into turn 12, like on a back shot as well. He really was going for it, Quartararo, and was running in a really good position, because he hadn't qualified very well, but he was like 9th after the first lap, because he'd sort of taken advantage of some of the other riders spinning up, and then as some crashed in front or made mistakes, he worked his way back up. I mean, the result in the end still wasn't like an amazing result he'd be really happy with, and he wasn't that happy with the race, because I think he was happy to be battling, but I think he was kind of saying, well, we haven't taken a step, it's just the others have sort of come back to us a little bit because of the conditions. So yeah, it was a really good sprint for Fabio. It was good to see him as well, because you don't see a lot of him, and it was good to see he's still got that fight in him, and it very much was reminiscent of that 2022 season where he was pulling some really good passes on some of the Ducatis in some places, and he was just getting minced on the straight, bless him. It's not even necessarily the straight line speed top end, it was actually just acceleration. He was just getting absolutely dropped. Even in the corners, he wasn't gaining a lot back, like how in the past you have seen that with the Ducati versus Yamaha battle and stuff. You see him in the corner, they just absolutely gaining them, whereas even with the tyre issue or whatever Bagnaia had, he wasn't really gaining them in the corners either. It was a little bit, but I think that was more Fabio than anything. So yeah, it really did seem to level things out. Brad Binder seemed to be doing a little bit better as well. Also, probably shout out to Johan Zarco as well. His weekend as a whole ended up actually being quite poor, or pretty much the same, but he got through to Q2 directly, which is the first time a Honda's done that all year, and I don't know how he did that, but yeah, he didn't make good use of it in the sprint, and didn't seem to really make good use of it in the main race either, unfortunately, because it would have been good to see if he could stay there. But I think it's a bit of a Honda thing, isn't it? Marquez would pull the odd really good lap out on the Honda last year as well, like he'd get through his Q2, or he'd put it on pole like he did at Portimao, but the bike just doesn't have it to compete there. You can maybe force it on one lap because it has still got some decent acceleration, and you can maybe grip onto the back of somebody, but I thought it'd be worthwhile giving a bit of a shout out to Zarco.
Yeah, it's supposed to start off with Zarco. His best day was Friday. Probably shouldn't have told him after that. And he was interviewed on the grid before the sprint, and he was kind of asked, like, oh, is it track conditions that have gotten you to this grid position, or the fact that Honda have made steps? And he kind of smiled and kind of just said a bit of both, instead of like, realistically, it was nothing to do with the bike. It was all him making the difference. And
the others were still at the back, as always. So
exactly, exactly. He had done the Marcus thing of the years gone, where like he was 0.9 quicker than the next Honda or whatever, and like 7 or 8 positions higher up than he probably should have been. Unfortunately, in the sprint, he got run wide, and as he came back, he got collected by another rider and crashed. I believe it was Anea Bastianini, and he was also punted off the racetrack early on in the main race. So any gain of qualifying was gone in the opening laps of each sprint and main race. So again, good to see Zach going to shows off what a rider he is, and it's kind of a shame he's on a Honda really at this point of his career, because the next couple of years of his career he'll probably end out as a average-ish looking rider, when he's definitely deserves to be towards the front. But Fabio was just, it's a shame. The more I see Fabio doing bits in P14, the more I just think that, like, when he retires, will we look back in his career, like, what we've missed from 22, 23, and 24. I suppose we saw a lot in 22, but all of 23 he was nowhere, all of 24 he's nowhere, 25, unless this kind of whole concessions for Yamaha, they're going to make it. Yeah, exactly. Like, again, I always try and play devil advocate and build the story for the podcast, but like realistically, Yamaha,
he might be a slightly less nowhere.
Yeah,
but I think
he might be able to.
Like, he might get, like, he could maybe scrape a podium next year, like in a normal race, but it's probably going to be like a really, really tough one.
Yeah, I think really it's going to be, if he can get to like next year's being a top 10 rider consistently, and if he can have like consistency into the Q2, that'd be brilliant, because that'll just get him back. And then when he's feeling it and when the bike is working at particular tracks, even though I don't think anymore that there is a Yamaha track that it goes well at, because it doesn't seem to go well at any of the historic ones. It doesn't go well anymore at Mugello. It doesn't seem to go well at Jerez. It doesn't seem to go well at Assen. We'll see when we get to Phillip Island if it can make a step, but over the last 2 seasons it hasn't done much there really. So yeah, it's a shame really, because again, he's just such a talent. It's such a shame to see him that far back, and I'd just like to see him on something that he could compete with and beat towards the front, because he's really, really exciting in the race, and he's it's just such a shame. But yeah, he had an amazing sprint, and there was obviously you were on about the overtake he pulled on Pecco into the downhill left. You just see the after that of both of them just blowing the corner. He's so up for it, and he's so aggressive in his racecraft, and he's so precise. And fortunately, he crashed in the main race in the corner that he overtook Pecco. But yeah, it just shows that Yamaha still have a long way to go, unfortunately, and unfortunately that means very little of Quartararo on the TV.
Yeah, it is unfortunate, but I think they'll probably get there in the end. Maybe it will take till the next rule cycle. I mean, I suppose it's one of those things where they are quite a way off, but if they just find a bit, they could still be a bit off, and he can maybe make the difference, and in the right conditions, he could get a good result still. But I mean, I think even as it stands, if the conditions are right, you obviously can get a good result. I mean, he nearly won at Mandalika last year, so you never know what could happen. And obviously this year he got the sprint podium that then got taken off him. So if there's some crazy race, he is still there enough to capitalise, which the Honda riders are just not. So the Yamaha is definitely a step ahead just on that basis. But yeah, it's I think it's going to still be a while till we see him at the front. But somebody that had another really good weekend himself, Jorge Martin, a champions weekend really. The only mistake he really made, well, 2 mistakes, was really crashing in qualifying, which he recovered from pretty well to still qualify 4th, and the slightly over-ambitious pass on Pedro near the beginning of the main race, really, which I think was just a desperation to maybe try and go with Marquez. He'd kind of already conceded a few times earlier on the weekend that his battle wasn't with Marquez, but he perhaps wanted to just maybe stick on him, see if he could push him into a mistake, or maybe more likely just be pulled away from the rest of the people so he didn't have to worry too much about them, because it was such a tricky circuit. I mean, I imagine actually focusing on another rider in front did make it a lot easier when like picking out where to be. So I imagine that was his target. But 2 second places when Bagnaia picked up nothing, did he? Or maybe a point. I think he picked up 1 point the entire weekend. So that's a really good haul back on Bagnaia. The biggest swing we'll have seen for a while, really, over the whole weekend. So yeah, there's not much more to say. He pretty much got the maximum. Nobody was beating Marc Marquez. So next he could do is be second, and he was an absolutely dominant second as well. He had nobody, like Acosta wasn't too far behind him in the sprint race, maybe like 4 seconds, but he was like 10, 11 seconds clear of third place in the sprint race, in the main race, which, yeah, that's ridiculous. It's ridiculously dominant, and a weekend where clearly the GP24 was struggling a little bit, because both, more in the factory team than anything, to be fair, because Morbidelli wasn't doing too bad initially, but both of the factory guys and Morbidelli to an extent were just nowhere near Martin this weekend. It really was a good weekend. You kind of feel sorry for him that Marquez was so dominant, because it was definitely a weekend where he deserved the double, but he got the absolute maximum he could this weekend, I think.
Yeah, in my eyes, he got 2 race wins this weekend, because that's kind of the importance of them, even though they're both second places. For me, they're both race wins, because I think we both agree Marquez isn't going to win this title this year, because of the fact that he's not going to be able to go on a run and take that many points off of both GP24s at the
7
front
points
with that bike he has.
It's nothing, is it?
Yeah.
Really doesn't.
So yeah,
Marquez has chucked like 20 points away in a weekend, most weekends so far this year. So
Yeah. Maybe we might see a more consistent Marquez though, just literally on the podium every single
I think we
sprinting race at the end of the
probably
year.
will. Yeah.
Because the fact he's gotten another pole position, he's won a sprint and won a main. So I think he'll be kind of. It'd be like, remember last year when he kind of somehow managed to turn his form around on Honda and then just started doing absolutely amazing rides again after having that kind of
that
6-7 rounds where he was like,
season.
I'm going to finish ninth every race and that kind of thing. But yeah, I think. I mean, again, I say it's basically 2 race wins for Jorge Martin this weekend because it's just been such a strong weekend for him. He looked really good in both races. He was closer over the sprint and main race to Marquez than I expected. Now, I suppose Marquez probably could go at 80-90% and kind of just live with it. But I still thought that Marquez would pull much more out of them, but I suppose you don't need to risk on a track like that. But I was still impressed how good of a job Jorge Martin did. Didn't make any mistakes. Made a small mistake, obviously, in qualifying, but didn't really affect him in the end too much because probably in a way benefited him. He's in better track position, I suppose, for the launch in the conditions. We saw Pecco get 2 horrific race starts. We'll get to him in a minute, but there's not really much more Jorge Martin could have done. He didn't try and make something happen with Marquez and risk throwing away points. He took a lot of points out of Pecco this weekend and is now a big leader in the championship. And we're going into these rounds now where we're going to get conditions and awkward races. This is the beginning of the awkward part of the season, you could say, with the resurfaced track and just the overall the lack of consistent weather. So I said it in Moto 3 and Moto 2, you don't want to go into this part of the season needing to chase and challenge. You want to go in with nice point advantage, going in, being able to take seconds and thirds and just put points on the board, and that will get you a title. And I think Jorge Martin started this part of the season off really well now as we're going towards the business end, as we're slowly getting into it.
Yeah, and this is the part of the season where he thrived last year. This is where he really did the damage as well. So, I mean,
Yeah,
like
exactly.
obviously he crashed at the Mandalika, but that was a big, other than that, like the rest of the weekend, he did some pretty big damage and some silly things he did. But, generally he won't do them again. You would imagine he's not going to pick the wrong tire at Phillip Island this year. So you would guess that that this time he might actually be able to bring it home. But this is where he was really strong last year. So I imagine he's going to have a lot of confidence. And it is crazy when you think about the amount of wins Bagnaia had this year. Like, he's leveled his number of wins from the last 2 seasons already, and he's now trailing by like 23 points, is it? So nearly a race win's worth. Martin can afford to take a couple of second places if he needs to, which he has been doing really well this year. Like he did last weekend at Austria, did it at Assen as well. Not won since Le Mans, I think, Martin as well. So it's been a while. He's had to take a lot of second places, but yeah, it really was a really fantastic weekend from him. And obviously his title rival Bagnaia, shocker, absolute shocker of a weekend. From Friday morning, it's been pretty poor. He actually did a really good job to salvage it, I think, actually, over the Friday afternoon and the Saturday to actually get 3rd place on the grid. But that's basically where the good part of his weekend really ended. I mean, his main race, actually, we'll talk about in a minute, I guess, was pretty decent up until the incident happened. But yeah, obviously wasn't feeling it in FP1. Neither was Bastianini. I think they'd gone the wrong way with the setup and stuff like that. Kind of did show as well this year that without having that data from last year, I think it definitely affected them more, because the jump between probably the previous data they did have, the 22 bike and the 24, is now such a big gap. Maybe it was more of an issue, whereas we saw last year the 22 bike could threaten the 23 bike. They are quite similar. So I think the data was maybe more applicable for the 23 guys, which could also be a reason why they're doing a little bit better, probably while the 24s are struggling a bit. But Friday morning was chucked away, of course, effectively because of that. It was like 20th place, which obviously is not doesn't really matter, because the first free practice session doesn't mean anything. It's free practice for a reason. But he got himself together in the afternoon, got through to Q2, qualified 3rd, was a pretty good qualifying lap, to be fair, just behind, pretty close to Acosta, I think it was, and just ahead of Martin. So he pretty much got himself in the prime position. I think Bagnaia was more bothered about Marquez than Martin was, because he was in a part for me, because I just scratched his head like, how's this guy got 8/10 on us? Whereas I think Martin was happy to sort of disregard it and just say let him win this weekend, whereas I think it definitely bothered Bagnaia more. So I think maybe that didn't help him. But either way, he'd done all he needed to. He qualified in front of Martin. But obviously, like you said, on the grid, we had really dirty 3rd place, or dirty left-hand side of the grid. He had a massive spin-up, very similar to the one that Martin had in Qatar last year. Like pretty much identical, like spin across the track. And then from that point in the sprint, he just had no pace at all. Probably completely destroyed his tyre. I thought straight away that it's probably the same kind of thing that happened to Martin in last year at Qatar. Like if you spin the tyre up in that way, it must just ruin the tyre or take the tyre off the rim a little bit or whatever it was. But clearly he had no confidence at all. He ran wide a couple of times, lost some positions, was battling with Quartararo, which even in the weekend with the GP24 was struggling. He shouldn't have been doing. That's obviously no disrespect to Fabio, more of a disrespect to the Yamaha, I guess, being so bad that even an ailing Ducati is better. He came into the pits, pointed straight away and said something to the Michelin man. Not the actual Michelin man, the logo, the Michelin guy in his garage. So that was the sprint race. I suppose I'll pass over to you for his pre-weekend sprint race. We can maybe talk about the main race afterwards to avoid me going on for too long about it. But pretty much a disaster, really, up until aside from the Friday afternoon, really, up until that point, it had been a terrible weekend. Absolutely nothing.
Yeah, his weekend wasn't that bad that he was talking to a little sticker on his front fender, but it was. To be honest, I don't think he had a bad weekend. I think it's overall the weekend, the GP24, especially the factories, weren't working well. He has kind of hinted he got a dud on Friday morning, and that's where a lot of his issues was, because he made a huge step in Friday afternoon, getting into Q2 directly, and then very good in qualifying on Saturday morning, and immediately in the Friday debrief, he said that he has asked them to clean the grid kind of a lot for the sprint on Saturday, and they apparently did, but the fact that it rained brought a lot of stuff back on, and we saw both race starts, he spins up, goes sideways. I completely agree. I reckon he had some sort of issue with the tyre after it's spinning up on the grid on the sprint, because he said after I think it was like 5 corners. And first off, as well, because he got a bad start, he couldn't get the ride height device off properly. You could see in both race starts where if you're actually on board with him, you can kind of see the bike kind of yo-yoing back and forward as he's trying to pump a bit of brake pressure and just get the front end to nosedive and to kind of release the ride height device. So again, more reasons to get rid of him. And
Tardozzi doesn't want to do that.
I know Tardozzi, even though it's affecting Tardozzi at this point.
It's safer to have the ride device.
But
you spin less.
Spin less. Let's just analyse Pecco start, shall we, with spinning less? I don't think you could spin more if you tried. We saw, I think, Frankie Saturday morning nearly high side from a standing start.
Yeah, he did. Martin had one on a practice start as well, didn't he?
Yeah, so it's just shows that if the track conditions aren't in good conditions, the bikes are very difficult to get off the line in a race situation, which is obviously not good. We saw on Sunday morning, we've already talking that they had a little bit of time to do some practice starts, but it didn't really come to venting for us because different conditions. It's pretty much a full wet track at that point with a bit of spotting of a dry line coming. So it was an interesting one, but it was different conditions when they got the actual race come race time. So I think his sprint really couldn't really do much more. The fact he was battling the Yamaha of Fabio Quartararo was a worry from him. He did get lunged on the last lap by Bezzecchi, and he overtook him, but he managed to kind of get the cut back and get the run to the last corner. But his sprint was ruled out straight away. And then when he came back, and the Michelin technician that he went straight to and kind of was like the kind of two symbol he gave him. So like, again, in his interviews, he didn't say anything about Michelin. He kind of avoided it when he glanced past it when he was being asked. So yeah, it would have been the title or the main kind of sponsor, kind of main supplier. It's in their contracts that they can't actually slate or say anything about the tires. They can't say that they got a bad tire, as it's the overall, which I think is wrong. It's kind of difficult because we see, even if you're, for example, we go back to Texas 2019 when Mark crashed. Mark took the blame for that when it's widely believed it was a Honda technical issue that he crashed. So even then it hasn't. But yeah, Mark never came out saying that it was a Honda thing. He always kind of said he made a mistake, even though he was miles up the road, he was comfortable, and he got tipped off. So it was such a strange one for that. But it seems in top level sport they always try and keep it under cover, and they don't let the truth come out. I suppose I can understand it in some sense, but when I think it's a tire issue, it's not acceptable that they have to keep quiet even if they had a bad tire, because that looks like Pecco's had 2 bad tires in 2 days, which is really ruined his race weekend. His Sunday was good up until the incident with Alex Marquez. I think again rolling burnout off the line, drops back. Again, it looks like he struggles to get the right device off, and then comes back and then is going to get 16 points for third position. And his weekend doesn't look too bad in overall, but then ends up with a Grassini sitting on his head. So yeah, I'll leave you kind of. We usually kind of talk about some things before the podcast. I don't know your opinion on it. I'll throw back to you before I give my thoughts. What do you make of that whole incident? Really, do you think penalties for either of them, or what?
I'll talk about this whole race briefly first. Just because I agree. I think it's actually going to be a really good damage limitation race for him. He'd sort of found his way through the pack really well. It's difficult to pass. Like we've obviously got to drive this home. I know we've talked about it a little bit, but maybe we haven't focused it on so much in the GP class how hard it was to pass, which was another reason why Fabio Quartararo was pulling out these lunges, because it's ridiculously difficult to overtake. Because the sort of one line, this is also why Martin went for a bit of an aggressive pass on Acosta, and then they both kind of lost the rear end and both nearly came off. A bit like what, if you watch World Superbikes, Johnny Ray did to Bautista last year at Mandalika. So again, Mandalika comes up in this situation. He went underneath him. They both went offline. They both had a massive twitch, and Bautista went pinging up in the air because he got high-sided off, and Ray almost crashed as well. As soon as he got offline, just so lack of grip, and yeah, it was making it really difficult for him to come back from the start. See, because he had the spin up once again, but he'd done really good job to get up to fourth. Then he just caught Alex Marquez in the matter of a couple of laps. Alex Marquez ran a bit wide. Obviously, then the incident happened, so it was looking like a really good week. Like even before he caught Alex Marquez, fourth place was going to be a really good damage limitation. Third place would have been even better because it's actually only 4 points to Martin. But, it's like not even that bad. You take Marquez out of it. Like if Marquez crashed, he's losing more points at that point. Like you know what I mean? That's how little the gap was. So it wasn't too bad, but. Yeah, I don't know about the start this time. Obviously, in the sprint race, a lot of people span up, whereas in the main race, it's pretty much only Bagnaia. So I don't know whether maybe that's not rider error, but maybe slightly a sort of a configuration error in a way. Like, surely if you span up so much on the sprint race, then do you not change your start mapping to give you less torque so you don't do it again? I don't know. I don't know whether maybe there's a slight issue with that, because I know there was probably a couple of people that did spin up, but it didn't seem as bad in the main race. Didn't happen really in any of the lower categories, which I know obviously they don't have as much power, so it's not likely to happen. But I don't know whether maybe there's slightly more to it than the track conditions on that particular second one. But even still, I don't think it's his fault either way, so it doesn't really matter when you talk about his race as a whole. But yeah, he caught to the back of Alex Marquez. Alex Marquez runs wide at turn 12. Bagnaia, to be fair, did exactly what I think anyone would do, in terms of just stick to the racing line, and you're probably going to pass this guy because he's ran off, he's going to have to rejoin the circuit. And he pretty much did, but unfortunately the way that it obviously works is that if you run off the track at 12, you come back on the track into 13, you're on the inside. And because the tyres would have been dirty from going off circuit, the offline was dirty, you can't turn that well. You saw Alex Marquez, he missed the apex there was a decent gap. There was enough room for Alex Marquez, effectively. He missed the apex as the contact. And then I think 90% of the time, if you can pick up quick enough, neither of them go down there. That's just a bit of a, whoa, they've had to pick the bike up, because I've seen incidents like that happen quite a lot. But because they got hooked, neither of them could do anything. Alex Marquez was just a passenger as soon as they hooked. Obviously, same with Bagnaia as well. So it picks Bagnaia's bike up, chucks them both down the road. Bagnaia, really got caught up in the bike. So did Alex Marquez. So it's good to see they both were relatively okay by the looks of it. They obviously, I imagine they both went to the med centre to get checked out. But really, it was a nasty one. I think Bagnaia's leathers got ripped a bit as well. I really did feel for him getting stuck between those two bikes. But I don't know. It's hard to say in terms of the collision, because at first, when I first saw it, I was like, oh, Alex Marquez has just completely wiped him out there, trying to hang out at the inside. And then the other shot's Alex Marquez has run a bit wide, but it is a pinch point. It's a bit of a racing incident. And there's another shot where Alex Marquez kind of was maybe a bit ambitious, but I don't know. It's hard to say. He did rejoin the circuit, but then that doesn't necessarily mean you have to give up the spot. But then when it's pinching like that, maybe do you just think the better of it and back out? But I think, again, track conditions definitely played a part, because obviously there was only one line, and because I guess his tyres would have been a bit dirty from running offline, he maybe couldn't turn as tight. But I think it's a racing incident, that one, in fairness. It's two lines coming into one. I don't think Bagnaia really could have done a lot more. Obviously, easiest solution is to just leave a bit more room just in case the other guy is coming back on the track. But you're supposed to rejoin safely, not stick at the inside. And like I said, I think anybody, if you're in a position where you can stick on the racing line and overtake someone, you're going to do that. So I don't think Pecco could really take much blame there. And Alex Marquez maybe a bit, if I'm going to apportion blame slightly, I would say more towards Alex Marquez, but I don't think it's like penalty worthy, particularly especially when you look at precedent with obviously Marc Marquez and Pecco back in Portimao. I think that was more Pecco's fault probably out of the two of them, but obviously that got put down as a race incident. This, I guess, is a similar kind of thing. Someone ran wide, although I suppose in that incident nobody left the circuit, whereas Alex Marquez did leave the circuit, although he comes back on the track, then where else is he supposed to go? But he could shut the throttle. So I think it was more on Alex Marquez, in my opinion. But I don't know whether really there should be a penalty for it, because it was just two lines sort of colliding, and I think there was other factors to it as well. But I'd be interested to see what you actually make of it, because I think you might find it very easy to call, but for me, I think it's quite a hard call.
The immediate reaction the first few times I watched it was just a racing incident, and I couldn't really put blame. Straight away, I can't see anything Pecco can do, because Pecco hasn't made any mistakes in my eyes. He's made the previous corner, didn't go wide, took the racing line and just has turned in, and he's well before the point of contact. He's already at least half a bike length in front, so immediately there's no blame can put him, because he's already passed Alex Marquez in my eyes. The few minutes when I was waiting before the podcast to kind of get going on Twitter, formerly known as X, pretty much every GP rider I've seen comment on it is putting all blame on Alex Marquez, that he just rode into him. Miller, Oliveira and Quartararo were the three. I think there's another one as well I can't think of. Maybe one of the Fernandez's as well, maybe. But basically everyone was like, he's going for a gap that's not going to kind of keep going. I'm going to stick with my own just kind of instinct at the time, because I was thinking with this a lot of times, you can easily get swayed by a commentator or what you see another rider say, and then you can stick to that, because if Fabio Quartararo said, I was like, I like Fabio, and I agree with Fabio, but I'm going to just stick to what I kind of originally thought and what I've seen from it still. Some of the overhead shots make it look, maybe sometimes they can look worse and better. So I'm going to stick with racing incident, but definitely much more. If I had to put the blame, it's completely on Alex Marquez and Moyes. There's no question. I don't think Pecco can do anything. He's gone past him, and he's basically had a bike pushed into his side. And again, you were making the point that we've seen incidents like this before. Jerez, Marc Marquez and Pecco, where Pecco just kind of literally just sticks the wheel in and they touch and he sits up and Pecco keeps the position. It's nearly identical. It's just a different camber, different angle. And it was... For me, it's all
the problem. If they didn't hook, I think you'd be fine. But
yeah, exactly. I think the hooking thing is what makes the race incident, because realistically, if that was Moto 2, I reckon Pecco kind of gets a little pick up small bit of effect, gets hit, runs a bit wide, and then probably breaks deep down into the bus up, keeps his position, and then we continue and Pecco gets his podium and stays. I just think the current GP bikes, the way they're so bloody awkward in so many different ways, that they just hook together and it just was stuck, and then you see Pecco kind of skip along the ground, and he's on the bike, and the bike eventually he's going across the ground so much that it just falls underneath him and he can't really do much. So I stand by my original first view of it being racing incident. I don't believe either of them deserve a penalty, but if we had to go black and white pick a side, I'm thinking Pecco's has no fault in the situation, and it's all in Marquez's favour in terms of the incident. But again, I'm still think racing incident, but if I have to pick, I'll be going Alex.
Yeah, so we seem to agree actually. So it'd been probably better if we had a bit of an argument, but I think that's I think that's probably the way, I guess.
Another thing as well I've seen is that the racetrack has not helped us, because at least soon as I reckon if we're at a different racetrack, Pecco doesn't slide off as easy when he goes off the line, because I reckon that's why he's crashed so easily.
Yeah, probably.
From the contact.
He also had a bike at the side, so it's like kind of...
That's true too, but it's just like he's upright, and then he's down. It's just a weird situation.
Yeah, I think as well, if the track is different, he perhaps does just take a slightly wider swoop just to make sure he's fully around the outside of him, whereas you don't want to leave the racing line because you'll crash. So yeah, we
saw the exact same thing with Enea, Pecco and Quattraro yesterday, and
Yeah.
all three of them went through the corner. It's exactly.
Yeah, they're all offline. Well, like Bastianini basically picked the line perfectly, but Bagnaia and Quattaro are offline, so they just couldn't turn or whatever. So, yeah, I think definitely more blame on. Well, yeah, the blame on Alex Marquez's side. I think, like I was saying, anyone would have done that in Bagnaia's situation. Would have just stuck to the race. If you can get an overtake while sticking to the racing line, 100% go for it because, well, you're on the racing line. But
Yeah, like Pecco has done the exact thing. He saw Alex. Like I called it from the moment Alex Marquez got on the brakes. I was like, yeah, he's not making this corner. And to be honest, I applaud him for staying on the track. I expect him to go off the track.
does he actually stay on the track? Because I thought he ran off, but if he stays,
He runs onto the curb and kind of
okay.
we'll suppose it's the AstroTurf, whatever it is, or the extra Mazzano curb, but he doesn't run completely off the track, and that just gives him the kind of a chance to not lunge back, but kind of try and keep somewhat of an inside line. Because like if you think of it, if he can just maybe kind of neutralise Pecco in the first right-hander, he has a much better opportunity then to do what I would say Fermin Aldeguer tried, and could just kind of leave the brake off and edge Pecco out, and then kind of go for a bit of a blocking line into the bus stop, and then we go to the last corner, and potentially he keeps his podium for another lap. But that's just trying to read what could happen, but obviously we saw what did happen.
Yeah, so I think we pretty much unanimously agree on that one then. And also, it's worth noting Alex Marquez is not exactly a stranger to causing an on-track incident. We've seen it quite a lot of times. Yeah. So not that should be taken into account particularly when assigning blame, but, you know, it's less out of the ordinary. We have also seen Bagnaia putting himself into some silly positions that result in him getting taken out, which I don't think this particularly is one, but you could maybe argue that more caution could have been taken, but again, I don't think he really should have done. I think it was the right thing to do, but it does seem to happen to Bagnaia more than it does to other riders, so maybe that's something he probably could think about. But I think in this incident, it is just one of those things that happened, unfortunately. But of course, all of that led us to a pretty big championship swing. Obviously, we did touch on it briefly when we were on about Martin's Champions Weekend, so perhaps we won't really dwell on it too much now. But 23 points. That is a pretty healthy championship lead there from Martin. He didn't even come into the round as the leader, did he either? So that's pretty much the perfect weekend he could have had. And are we saying maybe the momentum is with Martin? Because we were thinking, well, a lot of people were thinking after Sachsenring, after crashing out the lead and Bagnaia takes the lead and you got the summer break, that basically from here, Bagnaia is just going to romp away with it. But we're like, 3 or 4 rounds later, and now the lead is 23 points against Bagnaia. Now, of course, he can bring that back. We've seen him bring back bigger gaps, but are we thinking maybe that Martin has got a bit of momentum on his side now going into these last, 8 rounds of the season? Plenty of racing to go, of course, but just that little bit of confidence, maybe the ability to take a second place, I guess, as well, is always handy.
I put him currently as the championship favourite. Even with the might of Ducati probably pulling against him behind the scenes in terms of I don't think they'll restrict any data or anything. I don't think they'll go that bad, but I know for a fact they ain't getting any new bits and bobs off of GG.
Turns out GP16 next week.
Yeah, exactly. Rolled on Alvaro's bike from like 2018. I genuinely think at the moment he's the form rider. I think Pecco had a tough weekend this weekend, but not all down to Pecco. A lot of time we sit here and say Pecco's had a tough weekend. He just didn't look like he was able to. He crashes in the sprint and then has this issue in the race or whatever. But I think Pecco's actually performed quite well this weekend in all. Really, it's just where he qualified put him in a really bad spot for both races, and then he had an unfortunate collision with Alex Marquez, has kind of ruined his weekend. It gets a dud tyre possibly in Friday morning, which puts him behind in setup time, and then a dud in a sprint race. It's been pretty much it's like all the good luck Marc Marquez has had to win the races this weekend, all the bad luck has gone to Pecco, and that's why he's gotten 1 point from possible 37, 38, whatever it is. And I just think at the moment we don't know how injured he is. We saw last year when he crashed in Catalunya, he wasn't that injured, but it affected him for the next 5 rounds where he'd never looked as controlled and as fast. And then we were hearing issues, he can't brake like he wants to, the bike is changing. We could see another sort of issue like that where I think if we do, I think Martin is a lot stronger this year, and I think he can can control the championship, and we'll go into the final few rounds and it'll be all in Jorge Martin's hands to win or lose it. I don't think we'll see as many mistakes now in the run-in from Jorge Martin after what he did last year, crashing in Mandalika, wrong tyre in Phillip Island, and also the rash incident in Valencia, even though it was probably done by then, but still it wasn't going to make any difference by taking out people or putting himself out of the race. So I think right now definitely it's in his hands whether he can do it. I think if he can, I wouldn't put it past Martin beating Pecco in one of the Mazzano rounds. I just think we don't know now how fit Pecco is. He looked okay, but it's still, you could easily jar a shoulder, damage a wrist, an ankle in that crash where you're not only 85% mobility in the
might not feel it the next day. Could have been walking.
Exactly, it's one of those things.
When the adrenaline's gone, and he wakes up tomorrow morning, he could have a swollen ankle or rest, like you say.
Exactly, he looked perfect in the pictures and the comments from after the crash in Catalonia, and that went on for weeks afterwards. We saw arguably as big a crash today, like, because he gets trapped under Alex Marquez's bike, and as soon as he hit the gravel, he gets massively, like, there's so much torque on his body the way he gets rattled around. And I think, like, there's no way he hasn't strained, pulled, burned something, or he's definitely going to have some lasting effects from this, even though he looked perfectly fine. So did Alex Marquez, touch wood, after the pictures and walking back in the pits. But again, the adrenaline, the kind of frustration, the anger, all that can kind of cover over the true feeling of that incident. So we'll only have to wait and see. I'm not too sure how he'll get on, but I think if he has a bit of a hangover from this crash for the next 2 rounds and Martin gets it up to 30-35, well, then it's heavily Martin's to lose then at that point. Even with the amount of races we've left, I still think it's going to be hard, because I think Martin now is going to be... I think after Martin lost out on the factory seat, there was a bit of the kind of Joe Roberts effect where it got to his head. He hasn't won race, he's made mistakes, but I think now he's probably going thinking, oh, I can really hurt them where it hurts here now with this one, and kind of get the championship to Aprilia and take that number 1 spot to the Noale factory. But I think it's definitely a big plus this weekend for Jorge Martin. He was absolutely pretty much perfect bar one crash in qualifying. Again, come Sunday and the Saturday sprint, he was brilliant. So I think going forward, he could really put pressure on Pecco if he can leave both Mazzano races with over 30 points. I think he's 100% favourite then for me at the moment. I still think that maybe Pecco and the might of the factory team could somehow turn it, but for now at the moment I put faith that I don't know who will win it, but I definitely think Martin is favourite. I'd like to see if I'm in the minority with that.
So Luca Marini's not winning then, basically, is what you know.
Unlikely, no.
Yeah.
He's an equal chance of winning this year's championship as Fermin Aldeguer.
Ah, yes.
So make up that what you will.
But I think you make a good point there, because I think a lot of people assume that Mazzano is going to be just an easy walk for Bagnaia, but Martin did the double there last year. I know Bagnaia was injured, but Martin clearly goes well there. It's a circuit that suits him too. Yes, obviously the VR46 guys always go well there, but when you're at this level, the extra laps on the Panigale help, but they're not what makes the difference. I mean, the only time that's ever really happened was Portimao, and that's a case where, literally, like, you've had 3 days to learn the track compared to someone that's done 100,000 laps there. Okay, maybe, but when you've been doing laps at Massana since you're about 12, you're probably going to be all right. So, yes, I think it will be certainly an interesting one, and with the back-to-back Massanos, it's going to be a 2020-like comparison where you get to see how things evolve from one to the other. But there you go then, that is the end of this episode. So if you are listening on Spotify, please do rate the podcast 5 stars if you enjoyed, or if you are watching on YouTube, do like the videos, because both of them help us out and allow more people to find the podcast so we can have the community and more of you guys can enjoy it. But we will see you next week then for the San Marino Grand Prix.